Hello, girls. So, we'll begin with the wasteland today. Attached with this text is another document which will give you an introduction to the modernist poetry and how wasteland becomes a masterpiece of modernist poetry. We have already discussed that Eliot was a modernist writer. Now, when we talk about modernism, we are basically referring to the fact, we are basically referring to the era of early 20th century after effects of the world wars and how people were struggling through everything, and how it was very the world was in a deplorable condition and people were struggling through a lot of things, and one of them was dejection and depression. Okay, so out of this comes this masterpiece, The Wasteland, where Eliot is talking about fragmentation of mind and how all around him, whatever he sees is a wasteland. But he fills this poem with so many literary allusions and so many traditions and so many, what would you say, religious texts. He takes up, he alludes to a lot of religious texts and traditions, and he uses something called as the mythic method. Now, what is a mythic method? It is where you're narrating a text in a myth. In a way, a myth is narrated, in a way a tale is narrated to you. So you know how it goes, the structure goes like this: in the beginning it was this, and then this is what happened, and then this is what happened, and that is how the poem ends. This is called as a mythic narrative or structure. Now, the poem's use of allusions can be linked to something which we read in the earlier essay, Tradition and Individual Talent. So, Eliot actually championed in something called as the idea of impersonality. We discussed impersonality at length while studying the essay. And this poem, he makes his best effort to be absolutely impersonal. That is why he uses so many allusions, he uses so many literary references to make himself a little detached, or not just a little, but actually quite a lot detached from the actual text. Okay, we'll begin today with the first part of the poem. The poem is divided into 5 sections. We'll begin with the first section today, and I'll give you a rough summary of the poem and then the analysis of the first section. So, the first section is called as the burial of the dead. Okay, but before this, Eliot says for Ezra Pound. Now, Ezra Pound was not just an inspiration to Eliot, but also a dear friend of his. Okay, so he dedicates the poem. He dedicates his masterpiece to Ezra Pound, and Il Miglior Fabbro means the better craftsman. Okay, so he deems Ezra Pound as the better craftsman or the better poet within when the two of them are compared. And then he begins with the burial of the dead. Okay, reading the burial of the dead. April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. Winter kept us warm, covering earth in forgetful snow, feeding a little life with dried tubers. Summer surprised us. Coming over the Starnberg Jersey, with a shower of rain, we stopped in the colonnade and went on in sunlight into the Hofgarten and drank coffee and talked for an hour. Bingar kein Rissen, stam aus Litauen echt durch. And when we were children staying at the Archduke's, my cousins, he took me out on a sled. And I was frightened. He said, Marie, Marie, hold on tight. And down we went. In the mountains, there you feel free. I read much of the night and go south in the winter. Now, the burial of the dead is the first of 5 sections that make up the wasteland. The section opens with the famous declaration. This is the famous declaration. It opens with this famous declaration that April is the cruelest month because it breeds lilacs out of a land that is dead. Okay? Lilacs out of the dead land. We'll highlight this here. Yes. Lilacs out of the dead land. and that the winter snows were perfect because they covered this dead land. Winter kept us warm. Now this is extremely unpredictable and extremely surprising, because winter is usually described as cold and unwelcoming, whereas April, which is the month of summer and spring for most of the countries, is the month which is welcomed. But here you will see that Eliot actually is going in a reverse way. He says that lilacs are sprouting out of dead land. Hence, April is the cruelest month. That it can breed something so beautiful out of something so desolate and something so tragic, right? Whereas for him, winter kept us warm, covering earth in forgetful snow. So, this dead land is entirely covered up in snow, and hence we are not able to experience the deadness of the land, the death, the tragedy that is there, right? So, this is why for Eliot, winter has become warm, whereas April, which is a warm month, has become cold. Now we have a Countess Mary. If you go down a little here, right? Somewhere here, he said, Mary, Mary, hold on tight, and down we went. So we have a Countess Mary recalling how she used to stay at her cousins, the Archdukes, and they went sledding. Another speaker talks of a mysterious shadow rising to meet us. Now, when you go down, okay, when we go ahead, we will see that there's another speaker which will rise up. Now, what is the speaker? Let's continue. What are the roots that clutch? What branches grow out of the stony rubbish? Son of man, you cannot say or guess, for you know only a heap of broken images where the sun beats and the dead tree gives no shelter, the cricket no relief, and the dry stone no sound of water. Only there is shadow under this red rock. Come in under the shadow of this red rock, and I will show you something different from either. Your shadow at morning striding behind you, or your shadow at evening rising to meet you. I will show you fear in a handful of dust. Fresh, wet, der wind, der himadzu, main Irish kind, wo willis do. You gave me hyacinths first a year ago. They called me the hyacinth girl. Yet when we came back late from the hyacinth garden, your arms full and your hair wet, I could not speak, and my eyes failed. I was neither living nor dead, and I knew nothing. Looking into the heart of light, the silence. Ode und Lear das Meer. Madame Sosostris. Now we'll come on to Madame Sosostris later on. First, we'll try and decipher what he's trying to say here. So, we have a Countess Mary who's recalling how she used to stay at her cousins, the Archdukes, and they went sledding. Now, another speaker talks of a mysterious shadow rising to meet us. Then we have a woman's voice. Here, we have a woman's voice. This is a woman's voice, right? You gave me hyacinths first a year ago. They called me a hyacinth girl. This is a woman's voice, and she describes herself as the hyacinth girl. Now, the male speaker who answers her, here, you find an answer to this here. Yet, when we came back late from the hyacinth garden, your arms full and your hair wet, I could not speak and my eyes failed. Right? Now, this, assuming that this is a male speaker who answers her, seems to have lost all grip on reality when confronted with the woman who's coming out of the garden with her arms full of flowers and her hair wet. Right? So, you see, this is the first section of the poem, and we've already experienced a lot of fragmentation, lot of breaking. So a thought begins with one thing but goes on to another and just starts talking about something else altogether. Why is this happening? Okay, let's continue with this section. Madame Sosostris, famous clairvoyant, had a bad cold, nevertheless is known to be the wisest woman in Europe. With a wicked pack of cards, here, said she, is your card, the drowned Phoenician sailor? Those are pearls that were his eyes. Look, here is Belladonna, the lady of the rocks, the lady of situations. Here is the man with three staves, and here the wheel. And here is the one eyed merchant and this card, which is blank, is something he carries on his back, which I am forbidden to see. I do not find the hanged man fear death by water. I see crowds of people walking round in a ring. Thank you. If you see dear Mrs. Equitone, tell her I bring the horoscope myself. One must be so careful these days. Now, what is Madame Sosostris? She's probably a tarot card reader. Okay, so we have a section involving tarot cards which are used to foretell the future. We all know this. Now, which are dealt out of this clairvoyant Madame Sosostris. Madame Sosostris is the clairvoyant who is dealing these cards. Now, first part of the wasteland ends with what? With this male speaker coming here. Where is this male speaker going? He's saying, Unreal City, under the brown fog of a winter dawn, a crowd flowed over London Bridge, so many. I had not thought death had undone so many. Sighs, short and infrequent, were exhaled, and each man fixed his eyes before his feet. Flowed up the hill and down King William Street to where St. Mary Woolnoth kept the hours. With a dead sound on the final stroke of 9, there I saw one I knew and stopped him crying, Stetson, you who were with me in the ship sat Miley. That copse you planted last year in your garden, has it begun to sprout? Will it bloom this year, or has the sudden frost disturbed its bed? Oh, keep the dog far hence, that's friend to men. Or with his nails he'll dig it up again. You hypocrite lecture, mon semblable, mon frere. Okay, so it ends with this male speaker meeting this guy called Stetson, whom apparently he fought alongside in the Battle of Mile. Now this is funny because Battle of Mile is one of the Punic Wars of ancient times. Punic Wars, as in it happened sometime in 250 AD. Now this poem is being written in the 20th century. So how is this man meeting somebody who was there in the 3rd century? Right? He asks Stetson whether the copse he planted in his garden has begun to sprout. Can you see the imagery which is going on? He says, the copse you planted last year in your garden, has it begun to sprout? So you understand the thought process of these people, these characters who are there in the poem. They're basically very, I don't know, very delusional maybe, or they're not there, they're not present there in the time itself, they're moving somewhere in the past. Okay, now if we have to analyze this part, let's begin. I'll give you a short analysis also. You'll have to make pointers by listening to the lecture itself, right? So like I began, I told you this, that few people would probably name April as the cruelest of the 12 months. So immediately Eliot's poem, possibly recalling and overturning the opening lines of Chaucer's general prologue. Now this is, if we go to the initial lines, like I told you, lot of allusions. So these 4 5 lines are literally overturning the opening lines of Chaucer's general prologue to the Canterbury Tales. Now you'll have to go to Canterbury Tales for understanding this, and is out to surprise us with the unexpected. Now this surprise continues when we are told that it was winter, right, rather than spring or summer that kept the speaker warm. Now this is what is more surprising, because it covered up the dead land in snow, which made him, assuming rather teenously that the speaker is male, we forget the fact that it is a dead land, a wasteland. This land is a wasteland. What we are talking about is a wasteland here, right? Okay. Cool. Right. Then we find ourselves faced with several German references. Now, mention of the Hofgarten here. You see, the Hofgarten, it literally means count garden, or the garden in the center of Munich, and then a speaker who announces in German. This in German means this line, bin gar kein Russin, stammer Lituan echt Dusch. This means that no, I'm not Russian, I'm Lithuanian, a proper German. Right? Lithuanian, a proper German. Then we have a Countess Mary. recalling how she used to stay at her cousins, the Archdukes. I've already told you, and they went sledding. Now, winter is mentioned once again, right? Again, winter is mentioned. Next follows a section which returns us to the wasteland of the poem's title. What grows out of this dead land? Okay. Now, again, he's asking you again and again, what grows out of this dead land? Here, that surprising opening line begins to make even more sense. Now, there's a sense of fear and uncertainty regarding the future about what is going to grow out of the blasted land. This can be taken metaphorically as a reference to the devastation caused by the First World War. Okay, with so many people dead in just a few years, not just the millions of casualties in World War One itself, but also the many millions of people who succumbed to Spanish flu, which happened in 1918 and 1919. So the poet is wondering, what will the future bring now? How can a civilization rebuild itself in the face of such drastic devastation? Now, this spring will not be like others. The burial of the dead seems to say so. So many dead have been buried so quickly through war or illness. Now, this explains the reference to fear in a handful of dust. Here, I will show you fear in a handful of dust. Another important phrase. Now, what does it mean? Okay. The title of this section of Eliot's poem, The Burial of the Dead, is a reference to the Anglican prayer book and its prayers for the burial of the dead, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. This is the prayer that the Anglican prayer book has for the burial of the dead. It says, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, we are all dust in the end. So he alludes to this Anglican prayer book here. Now when we then get some more German, okay, fresh the wind blows. Now this all translates to this: fresh the wind blows towards home. Okay, my Irish child, where are you now? Okay, so the translation of these four lines are: fresh the wind blows towards home, my Irish child, where are you now? Now this is a reference to Tristan and Isolde, which is Wagner's opera. German person, Wagner's opera. Right? The Tristan and Isolde were a doomed romantic couple who fell in love, though Isolde was betrothed to the king. Okay. What relevance this has to the rest of the burial of dead is what is troubling, and it shows how many parts of the wasteland don't seem to fit with each other. With sudden gear changes and changes of setting, speaker, and subject, all right, these fragments all come together and they don't really make any sense. So, following his words in tradition and individual talent, this is what Eliot does. He creates a poem and he's throwing it to the readers to interpret it in their own way. Okay. Now, we now have this woman. Okay. Right here, we have a woman speaking to us and addressing her presumed lover, recalling how her lover has given her hyacinths. Hyacinths is a kind of flower. The lover replies that when they returned from the hyacinth garden, he experienced a sense of emptiness, which could either be ecstatic euphoria or deadened numbness. It could be ecstatic euphoria or deadened numbness. He says he was neither living nor dead, though suggesting that the strange feeling he experienced lay somewhere in between these two. Okay? Now, living nor dead, and I knew nothing, looking into the heart of light, the silence owed unleashed das Meer. Okay, again a quotation from Wagner's Tristan and Isolde. Waste and empty is the sea. Okay, the sea separating Tristan from his lover, that is. So he's talking about these two people who are probably in love, and this girl is a hyacinth, likes hyacinth, and she's been given hyacinth by her lover. And when the lover sees her like that, he's able to he forgets all about himself, and there's I don't know why, but not just me, nobody knows why there is this certain fragmentation in this poem. Again, the setting is changed. Okay, we find ourselves in the company of Madame Sosostris, a tarot reader who uses tarot cards to try to predict the future, something that links her to Sibyl from the epigraph to the wasteland. Now, Sibyls were classical female figures who would prophesy the future. You might, if you have read the Harry Potter, then you would remember that Professor Trelawney's first name is also Sibyl. So, Sibyls are basically creatures, mythical creatures who are females who could prophesy the future. Prophesy the future in the sense who could tell you the future. Now, we are told here feared death by water. And there is a reference to Ferdinand's drowned father from Shakespeare's The Tempest. Here, drowned Phoenician sailor. Okay. Again and again, there is a death by water. The hanged man feared death by water. This is an allusion to Shakespeare's Tempest. Okay. Shakespeare's Tempest. You've all heard of Shakespeare's Tempest? So, Ferdinand's drowned father. Ferdinand is the prince whose father is drowned, and that is how they reach the island where the main protagonist is living. Right? Now we leave this scene and find ourselves in London. Unreal city. We are finally in London for the first time, and we are told that the speaker witnessed a crowd of people flowing over London. Okay, a crowd flowed over London Bridge. Right? Whom death has undone. Are these the dead or the living dead whose lives have been undone by the deaths of other people, loved ones during the war, for instance? Again, I had not thought that death had undone so many. Size, short, and infrequent. We don't know whether these are ghosts, whether these are dead people wandering there, or just loved ones who are there during the war, for instance, right? These lines are ambiguous, but it's worth noting here that Eliot is loosely translating a line from medieval Italian poet Dante's Inferno here. Where is he doing this? Let's see. Behind it came so long a train of folk that I could never have believed death had undone so many. This is the line where he's basically trying to trying to pick up things from or reference Dante's Inferno. Okay. Everyone shuffles forward, sleepwalking through their own lives as if they're already dead inside. No, the speaker then encounters a man he knew named Stetson. He shouts out to him and claims they both fought at Myle, which is quite a feat given that this battle took place in 260 BC during the First Punic War between Rome and Carthage. Right? Another allusion. You were with me in the ships at Myle. Now, this is a funny allusion because this war happened thousands of years back. Well, it seems to be anachronistically mixing up the modern, the name Stetson, which is World War One, and the classical or ancient like Myle, which is part of another war of empires fought over 2 millennia ago. Okay, perhaps to suggest that nothing much changes. War continues to be a part of life. This is what he's suggesting, that nothing changes, war continues to be a part of life. The speaker then asks Stetson if the corpse he planted in his garden has begun to sprout. Okay, once again we have a perverted or unusual idea of new birth or things growing out of the land where the living and the dead are curiously intertwined. We then get an allusion to Jacobean playwright John Webster's play The White Devil. But keep the wolf far thence. Here. Oh, keep the dog far hence, that's friend to men. Now, this is an allusion to John Webster's play, The White Devil, which came out in 1612, and the lines from Webster's play read like, but keep the wolf far thence, that's foe to men, for with his nails he'll dig them up again. Okay. As with many of Eliot's allusions, he subtly alters the original wording so that wolf in Webster's original is domesticated to dog and foe, therefore becomes friend. Okay. Dogs are man's best friend, right? Okay. Webster's original lines are uttered about a man who is refused a proper burial in the churchyard. So his lines too refer to an unusual burial and the prospect of the dead being disturbed in their graves by the wolf. Eliot then changes again in the last line of The Burial of the Dead, quoting from French poet Charles Baudelaire: "You hypocrite reader, my likeness, my brother." Okay, my likeness, my brother. This is French now. This is not German. All right. This is French, and this is inspired by Charles Baudelaire, right? Not inspired, it is actually Baudelaire's quote itself, that "You hypocrite reader, my likeness, my brother." The Burial of the Dead. Okay, this is where Burial of the Dead ends, but it establishes some of the core themes of The Wasteland. Okay, what are the core themes here? Death, burial, rebirth. Now, it also hints at the impact of the First World War on the people of Europe. Okay, now Eliot said that his research into vegetation rituals and ceremonies fed into the wasteland. And this analysis of the burial of the dead highlights all of the curious ways in which things which are dead won't lie down but get up and walk again. Okay, so this is the analysis of the first part of Wasteland, Burial of the Dead. Please listen to the lecture and make your own points. Also, I need you girls to make a list of all the allusions that you can find within the first section. We will discuss these allusions in our live class, which we will have on Thursday. So, this is all for now. I hope you have a good day.